Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I moved to a quiet lake house to escape courtrooms, corruption, and a failing heart. But peace didn't last. It knocked once, in yoga pants and a clipboard, and declared war. They wanted my land. What they got was a fight with a man who used to prosecute criminals for a living. When I signed the final paperwork and stepped onto the porch of my lakefront house in Tennessee, I thought I had finally outrun the heart attack, the bureaucracy, and the ghosts of courtroom showdowns. Retiring early as a district attorney wasn't part of the plan, but my cardiologist and ex-wife both agreed on one thing. I needed peace. What I bought instead was a fight with a smiling monster in yoga pants named Karen. The house was a two-story craftsman with a wide wraparound porch and just enough creak in the floorboards to feel like history, not decay. It came with 3 acres of wooded land and a private dock that jutted out into a glassy lake shaped like a lazy question mark. The property had been foreclosed on and sat empty for over a year before I picked it up at a steep discount. Bank-owned, title clean, 0 HOA involvement. My realtor had double-checked. I had personally spoken with the county clerk and zoning office before signing anything. I'd seen too much legal mess in my life to not be cautious. This land was mine, unencumbered, ungoverned, untouched. Or so I thought. 2 weeks in, I was finally beginning to unwind. The morning birds were loud, the coffee tasted like freedom, and the only authority around was a hawk nesting in my neighbor's dead oak. That changed when I opened my mailbox and found a letter with the heading, Silver Fern Shores Community Association. The envelope was thick and beige, the kind of color only used for tax threats or divorce updates. I opened it while standing in the driveway, already feeling my blood pressure shift gears. The letter was polite, almost celebratory. It congratulated me on becoming part of a growing and cooperative community and explained that my lot was of strategic importance to the development plan. They were offering me a streamlined transition package of $130,000 in exchange for my property, emphasizing how generous this offer was, given the circumstances. There was even a section suggesting I could remain in the house for a transitional period of 30 days after surrender of title. I read it twice. Then laughed so hard I almost dropped my mug. I'd just dumped nearly $650,000 into purchasing and renovating this place. They were offering me a fifth of that. What kind of scam was this? I went inside, typed a very direct but professionally worded response, attached copies of my deed and the zoning map, and sent it via certified mail the next morning. I assumed that would be the end of it. Assumed. The very next afternoon, a BMW SUV pulled into my driveway like it owned the place. Out stepped a woman in her mid-50s with platinum blonde hair coiled tight and a clipboard clutched like a dagger. Her outfit screamed country club dominance. Beside her, a man in a navy blazer and boat shoes carried a leather folio and an expression like he'd just swallowed a lemon. "Mr. Brent," she called out without waiting for a greeting. "Karen Ambrose, president of Silver Fern Shores HOA. This is Mr. Holbrook, our legal liaison. Do you have a moment?" "I've got exactly one," I said, remaining on the porch. She climbed the steps without invitation, handed me a document, and said, "I believe you misunderstood our letter. This isn't an offer. It's a notification." I looked down at the paper. It was a near copy of the letter I'd received, only this one had a highlighted section referencing something called a community interest override. I'd never heard of such a thing. I was a prosecutor for over 20 years. I've seen corrupt developers, land grabs, and HOA presidents who thought they were governors, but this was a new shade of bold. "This isn't legal," I said, scanning the document. "My property isn't part of your HOA. That's not up for debate." Holbrook cleared his throat and spoke with the kind of tone that's supposed to sound reasonable, but always ends in a threat. "Mr. Brent, your parcel borders the recreational common access zone that Silver Fern Shores intends to expand. According to a recent adjustment in zoning designation, your land now falls under the HOA's proposed influence footprint." Proposed being the operative word, I snapped. "It's not enacted, it's not binding, and it sure as hell doesn't override my deed." Karen's smile turned brittle. "We're offering you a generous way out. You're new here. We understand you might not yet grasp the importance of harmony. But let me be blunt. The transfer will happen. The only question is whether it's voluntary or procedural. Lady, the last time someone talked to me like that, they were wearing a badge and ended up in front of a grand jury. You can both get off my porch. Now." She straightened, her mouth a thin line. "You'll regret this attitude, Mr. Brent. Nobody wins by resisting progress." Holbrook started to speak again, but I raised my hand, pointing to the driveway. 1 minute is up. They left, but not before Karen turned back and added, "Enjoy your weekends while you can." I didn't sleep well that night. The breeze off the lake was colder than usual, and the silence outside felt heavy, like the kind that comes before a storm. 3 days after Karen's visit, I stepped outside to water the planters I'd finally filled on the back deck. The lake glimmered like nothing bad had ever happened in the world. Then I noticed a piece of paper affixed to the wooden gate at the edge of my property. It was sealed inside a plastic sleeve with a county seal printed across the top. The heading read, "Notice of Temporary Property Freeze." I felt my stomach clench. I tore it down and scanned the fine print. The document claimed my property was under temporary restriction due to a discrepancy in recorded land jurisdiction filed by Silver Fern Shores Homeowners Association and pending formal resolution through appropriate municipal channels. The signature was from the Office of Planning and Development, County of Overton. It took me exactly 11 minutes to get the director of that office on the phone. The guy on the other end, clearly annoyed to be interrupted during his donut break, pulled up the request. Says here that the HOA submitted a zoning overlay from '03. One moment. Yes, it appears your parcel was listed as part of a proposed community expansion. They claim it was never formally updated. That's because it was never true, I said, nearly shouting into the receiver. That land was never part of Silver Fern Shores. The original platting predates the HOA by 15 years. Look, Mr. Brent, I don't know what to tell you, he said in that classic bureaucratic tone. We just follow what's filed unless it's disputed in court. Then consider it disputed, I growled. Expect a formal objection and counterfiling within 24 hours. I hung up and called my lawyer, Anita Franks. We'd worked together when I was still on the other side of the courtroom. She had that rare quality I admired. She could flay a corrupt official alive with a smile on her face and have the jury cheering for more. An hour later, she was at my place, black coffee in hand, a tablet in the other. They forged a zoning overlay, she said flatly. Sloppy work, too. The signature on this map doesn't match the actual zoning commissioners from back then. And they used a typeface that wasn't even standard in municipal records in 2003. Can we nail them for it? Oh, we will. But first, we need to file an injunction to reverse the freeze. And I want you to start documenting everything. Every call, every letter, every broken twig. I was halfway through setting up motion-activated cameras that afternoon when the water shut off. I twisted the outdoor faucet. Nothing. The indoor taps, too. Dead. The lights flickered twice and cut off. I checked the fuse box. All fine. I called the utilities. After bouncing through 3 departments, I got a calm woman on the line who informed me that a temporary administrative control transfer had been filed on my address. According to her records, the Silver Fern Shores HOA was now managing maintenance logistics for this region due to a pending zoning reassessment. They have no jurisdiction, I said slowly. Yes, sir, but until the freeze is resolved, we're required to follow the municipal records. Let me speak to your legal liaison, I snapped. It didn't matter. She transferred me to someone who didn't answer. I left a message, then called a plumber and an electrician to confirm it wasn't sabotage. It wasn't. It was administrative chokehold. That night, I installed the generator I'd bought in case of tornadoes, filled 10 gallons of water in storage drums, and started printing every document Anita sent me. I wrote a timeline of events, attached photos, compiled a binder titled In the Event of Court or War. The next morning, I walked outside and found a package left at my door. No name. Inside was a second copy of the freeze notice, only this one had a sticky note attached. Let's make this easy on everyone. You don't want to fight us. I stared at the note for a long time. Then I set up another camera, one hidden in a fake birdhouse by the porch. They wanted pressure. I'd give them pressure. I drove into town and hand-delivered the complaint to the clerk's office myself. Then I mailed copies to 3 local news stations. If HOA wanted to escalate this, they were going to learn what it was like to corner someone who used to prosecute organized crime rings for a living. By sundown, I had electricity, Wi-Fi, and a full tank of gas for my generator. The water wouldn't be back for days, but I'd make it. I wasn't about to be driven out by paperwork fraud and suburban warlords. By the fourth day without water, I was starting to feel like I was under siege. The lake shimmered less like a peaceful retreat and more like a baited trap. But I dealt with siege tactics before, except those were from cartel lawyers and scumbag county judges, not gardening-obsessed HOA tyrants. It was early Thursday morning when the first inspectors showed up. I spotted them through the front window, 3 men in khakis and reflective vests stepping onto my property like they owned it, clipboards in hand. One of them began taking pictures of my garage while the other 2 paced along the fence line, muttering and pointing like they were surveying a crime scene. They hadn't knocked, no calls, no notice. I stepped onto the porch, mug in hand, and called out, "You're about 30 feet into trespassing territory, gentlemen. Who sent you?" The oldest one, a guy with a mustache that looked glued on, looked up and said, "Routine HOA compliance inspection, sir. We've had reports of unpermitted structures and possible safety violations." I laughed once. "Unpermitted structures? You mean my legal garage and storage shed that's been here since the 80s? He blinked, not expecting resistance. "We'll need to document everything, sir." "For the record." "For whose record?" Another one piped up, "Silver Fern Shores Compliance and Oversight Committee." "Wrong answer," I said. "This isn't your jurisdiction. This property is not in your HOA. And if you take one more photo, I'm calling the sheriff." They hesitated just long enough for me to grab my phone and start recording. "Say cheese," I said as I filmed their confused expressions. "Tell the internet how you're trespassing for a fake inspection under false authority." The guy with the mustache turned red and motioned for the others to back off. They retreated, muttering something about calling their supervisor. I called the sheriff. When Deputy Crawley showed up 40 minutes later, I showed him the video, the letter from the zoning office, and the binder Anita helped me prepare. "I recognize that guy," Crawley said, looking at the still frame of Mustache Man. "He works part-time with Landmark Property Services. That's a contractor Silver Fern Shores uses." "So not a county official," I said. "Not even close." I filed a trespass report and requested a protective order to block further unauthorized visits. Crawley promised to escalate it up the chain, though his tone made it clear that the sheriff's department wasn't eager to tangle with the HOA's legal team. Still, it was a crack, and cracks tend to spread. That evening, I walked out to check my mailbox and found something else waiting, a folded sheet of paper tucked into the box with no envelope. In Sharpie printed in block letters, it read, "You're making things harder than they need to be. Sell now, before someone gets hurt." There was no signature, no HOA letterhead this time, just ink and intent. I stared at it for a long time, then slipped it into a plastic sleeve and added it to the binder under threats. I didn't call the police this time. I knew how these things worked. Anonymous notes get logged, shrugged at, and forgotten. But cameras? They remember. That night, I went into full surveillance mode. I upgraded every camera to infrared, added 2 more trail cams in the trees along the rear fence line, and even drilled a mini cam into the underside of the dock, just in case someone thought the lake offered a stealthy approach. I also installed 1 dummy cam, visible and blinking red, just to give them something to find and smash. The next day, Anita showed up with something unexpected, photos she got from a private investigator she'd hired on a hunch. "These were taken at the Silver Fern HOA board meeting 2 nights ago," she said, spreading out the prints on my dining table. One showed Karen and the 3 inspectors sitting together at the front of a community center room. The caption on the whiteboard behind them read, "Phase 2 expansion strategy, containment measures and negotiation tactics." I stared at that phrase for a long time. "Containment," I muttered. Anita nodded. "They're treating your property like a hostage situation, except you're the one they're trying to starve out." She'd already filed a restraining order and submitted requests for the HOA's bylaws and meeting records under the state's Open Governance Act. If they were using official HOA funds to pay for sabotage, it would be public record and admissible. Then, just when I thought it couldn't escalate more, my power went out again. I stomped out to the side of the house, flashlight in hand, only to find something new. A tamper lock had been installed over my electrical meter. A red sticker across the panel read, "Managed by HOA Utility Coordination Program. Do not remove." That sticker lasted about 20 seconds. I pried the lock off with a crowbar, documented it with photos, and reconnected the power myself. Then I called the utility company, who had no idea what I was talking about. "I swear, Mr. What? Brent," the rep told me. "We've never heard of that program." They just made it up, I said flatly. Probably, but you didn't hear that from me. I slept with a 38 under my pillow that night. Not out of paranoia, but because my gut, the same gut that had survived 2 decades of knowing when someone was about to make their move, was telling me this war had only just started. It started with rain, a steady, quiet kind of drizzle that softened the sound of everything around the house, masking footsteps and muffling motion. It was a Saturday night, just past 11, and I was half watching a documentary on cave systems when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. Camera 3, northeast corner of the property, near the tree line. I sat up, heart ticking faster. The thumbnail preview showed 2 figures in ponchos, moving low and quick along the side path. One of them carried something, a dark, rectangular canister. My mouth went dry. I tapped into the live feed. The image was grainy from the mist, but the shapes were clear enough. They were heading straight for my back fence. The one with the can was unscrewing a cap. The other one took something out of a bag. Looked like a rag. That was when it clicked. Gas and a fuse. I grabbed my phone, called 911, and stepped into my boots without socks. I didn't care. I grabbed the .38 from the side drawer, chambered it, and turned every damn light on around the perimeter with a single button on my wall panel. Floodlights roared to life. The yard lit up like a prison yard during a breakout. Both men froze. The taller one dropped the can. The other ran, vaulted over the back fence like a spooked deer. The first one scrambled after him, slipping in the wet grass. Dispatch was still on the line. Shots fired. Not yet, I said through gritted teeth. But you better send someone fast. They tried to torch my house. The cops arrived 20 minutes later. Too late to catch them, of course. But I had the footage. Not just silhouettes this time. Faces. The birdhouse cam caught one of them looking up as the floodlights hit. And that was all I needed. Deputy Crawley reviewed the video in my living room, jaw clenched tight. "Recognize that one," he said. "Saw him at the HOA block party last summer. He's one of their weekend security guys. Name's Felix something." "Still think this is just a zoning dispute?" I asked. He didn't answer. They filed a report, marked it attempted arson. I gave them the footage, printed stills, everything. But I already knew how this would go. The HOA would claim they were acting independently, that this was just a coincidence. A misunderstanding. 2 rogue volunteers out on a walk with gasoline. Anita came over the next morning and reviewed the footage again. "We've got enough to request criminal charges," she said. "Attempted arson, conspiracy, trespassing, and if we connect this back to HOA funds, we bury them." Exactly. She also suggested bringing in a fire risk expert to walk the property and document how close they came to real damage. The rain had saved the house. The fire would have caught the old mulch pile and crawled straight to the porch if not for the weather. But that wasn't all that night brought. Later, around 2 a.m., I got another alert, this time from a camera facing the front gate. A shadowy figure approached the mailbox, stuffed something inside, and walked away. No car in sight, just vanished back into the dark. When I retrieved the envelope the next morning, it wasn't even sealed. Inside was a single photo, a printout from my own security camera feed. It showed me standing in my yard with the gun in my hand, pointing it toward the woods. The image was zoomed and cropped to make it look like I was threatening someone. There was a note written across the bottom in red marker. "You point, we burn." That was the moment something in me cracked, not with fear, but with clarity. This wasn't some passive-aggressive HOA spat anymore. It was war. The kind with silencers, fire starters, and veiled blackmail. I sat on the porch that morning with my coffee, looking out at the quiet lake, thinking about all the petty tyrants I'd faced in courtrooms over the years. And I realized Karen Ambrose had no idea who she was trying to break. By noon, I had Anita file an emergency protective order against the HOA and any representative or agent acting under its authority. We included Felix, the security contractor, and requested the court freeze any HOA expenditure until an audit could be performed. Meanwhile, I made calls to every local news outlet within 100 miles. A homeowner being targeted by an HOA over a land grab. That was the kind of story that local anchors drooled over. One station, WTVR Channel 9, bit immediately. A camera crew was at my gate by 4 in the afternoon. I told them everything on record. The threat, the power cuts, the forged zoning map, the fire, the photo. The story aired that evening. Lakefront nightmare, retired prosecutor targeted by rogue HOA. It ran in the A block, full 5 minutes, including footage of the gasoline can and security footage of the men fleeing. By midnight, the HOA's Facebook page was locked. Their website redirected to a maintenance page. But the damage was already done. Silver Fern Shores was under a microscope now, and I wasn't blinking. The next 48 hours were chaos, but the kind I could work with. After the news story aired, I received a dozen emails from people I didn't know, all claiming to have had run-ins with Silver Fern Shores HOA. Most of them were stories of overreach, fines for mailbox color, mandatory community fees with no receipts, threats of liens over garden gnomes. But 3 stood out. 3 people who had owned land adjacent to the HOA's territory and had been persuaded to sell under suspicious circumstances. One of them was an elderly woman named Mrs. Hathaway. Her email was short and shaky. They said if I didn't sell, my house would be condemned. I caved. Please stop them. I called Anita. She was already 5 steps ahead of me. I've filed a formal complaint to the state attorney's office, she said. And I got a response. They're opening a preliminary inquiry, quietly, for now. But if we can tie what happened to you with prior cases, this becomes a pattern. A RICO pattern. That word made me pause. RICO. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It wasn't easy to invoke, but if we could show the HOA acted like an organized racket, extortion, fraud, conspiracy, we weren't just dealing with civil claims anymore. This could turn criminal in the eyes of the state. Anita had also managed to obtain internal documents from the HOA's board meetings. Not officially, of course. Someone had sent them anonymously, scanned PDFs, dated over the past 2 years. There were references to property conversion zones, Phase 3 lakefront integration, and, most damning, a signed letter of intent between the HOA and a corporate development firm called Marlowe Holdings. They were planning to build a private marina and spa on the lakefront, but they needed full control of the shoreline first. I went digging into Marlowe Holdings. Turns out they weren't just some faceless real estate firm. They were part of a shell web of corporations tied to a Delaware-registered entity known for political lobbying and sweetheart contracts. The CEO? A man named Brian Kessler. I'd prosecuted his brother 15 years ago for tax evasion and bribery. It always comes full circle. Meanwhile, the fallout from the news report was hitting Karen hard. The local paper ran a follow-up piece. Silver Fern HOA president accused of land grab tactics. Her carefully curated public image, tight blazers, community bake sales, morally superior Facebook posts was crumbling under scrutiny. Neighbors began whispering. One even knocked on my gate. A middle-aged man in a fishing vest named Carl. "I don't want no trouble," he said, eyes darting. But I seen her. I seen Karen arguing with those 2 boys behind the clubhouse. The ones from the video. Told them they botched it. Used those words exactly. Botched it. I took his statement and passed it to Anita. She had her pee. I reach out to Carl discreetly. If we could connect Karen directly to the arson attempt, the entire board might go down with her. Then came the surprise twist. A county employee, junior zoning analyst named Ellie Whitmore, reached out anonymously through Anita's legal inbox. She said she'd reviewed the zoning map submitted by Silver Fern Shores and found irregularities. I pulled the archive records, she wrote. There's no such overlay from 2003. The one they filed is a forgery. It was added to the system via backdoor access, and someone used an outdated login to slip it into the public folder. We had a whistleblower. With Ellie's help, Anita drafted a full report, time-stamped and notarized, and submitted it to the State Zoning Oversight Committee. Then, she did something bold. She leaked it, anonymously, to the same local TV reporter who'd first aired our story. Within 24 hours, a second segment ran. Leaked report alleges HOA falsified zoning map to seize lakefront property. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. "You don't know what you've started." I didn't reply. I just saved the number, forwarded it to Anita, and kept going. That was the same day the HOA's law firm officially dropped them as clients, citing inconsistencies in documentation and ongoing investigations. Their own lawyers were running for cover. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to momentum, not just defense, but offense. We weren't just holding the line anymore. We were starting to win. For every punch we threw, the HOA tried to throw 2 back. And they were getting sloppy. 2 days after the second news story aired, I was served at my front gate by a man in a navy suit and too much cologne. Certified envelope, legal seal. He handed it over without eye contact and walked off down the gravel path to a black Escalade. Inside, a cease and desist letter from a new law firm representing Silver Fern Shores HOA. The letter accused me of spreading malicious falsehoods, conducting unauthorized surveillance, harassing community volunteers, and endangering public safety. They were threatening to sue me for defamation, interference in community operations, and emotional distress. It would have been funny if it weren't so obviously coordinated. I called Anita and read the letter to her over speakerphone. She snorted. A shotgun bluff. They're bleeding, so now they're trying to make you blink. They have no grounds for anything in that letter, especially not surveillance on your own property. Still, she filed a preemptive counterclaim the next morning, accusing the HOA of slap tactics, strategic lawsuit against public participation. Basically, they were trying to silence me through legal threats. Except I knew the game and I had a damn good lawyer, but they weren't done. That weekend, while I was out meeting with Ellie to prepare a sworn affidavit about the forged zoning map, someone tried to stage an incident at my home. I came back to find police cruisers parked in my gravel driveway and 2 officers questioning my neighbor Carl, who looked like he was about to faint. "What's going on?" I asked, cutting through the drizzle. One of the officers, a younger guy I hadn't seen before, glanced at me with uncertainty. "We received a report of illegal weapons stockpiling on the premises. Caller said there were explosive materials stored in your garage." I almost laughed. "Explosives? In my garage? You want to check it? Be my guest." They did. Full walkthrough, with Carl hovering nearby trying to explain that the caller had used a fake name and hung up mid-call. The search, of course, turned up nothing but a collection of old fishing gear, my tool chest, and a vintage smoker I never used. I filed yet another report, this time for false police reporting, which, if proven, carried criminal charges. Anita added it to our growing list, but the most dangerous move came 2 days later. A man named Dale Howard, a contractor who'd supposedly worked for the HOA in the past, filed a sworn statement in county court, alleging that I had threatened him with a firearm and warned him not to cross the lake line. He claimed to have audio. Proof, too. I sat in Anita's office, staring at the complaint in disbelief. "They're trying to flip the script," she said, tapping the affidavit. "Make you the aggressor, put you on the defensive." "But I've never met this man," I said. "Never seen his face. Never spoken to him." She leaned in. "And that's why we're going to destroy this claim. I've already subpoenaed the original audio file." When it came in, we sat together and played it. The voice was grainy but familiar. It was mine all right, but it had been spliced, chopped up and rearranged from my interviews on TV, my statements to the police, even an old YouTube clip from a seminar I gave years ago as DA. They'd cobbled together a fake confession from my own public words. "Deepfake audio," Anita said grimly. "They really are desperate." We sent the file to a forensic audio expert who confirmed manipulation. Compression artifacts, inconsistent acoustics, and digital splicing markers, enough for a counterclaim and possibly criminal fraud charges against both Dale Howard and whoever submitted the fake file to the court. By this point, my house looked like a surveillance bunker. Every window had a camera within 20 feet. I kept a GPS logger in my truck, a hidden recorder on my phone, and a backup battery pack in my coat pocket. Because now, it wasn't just about holding on to the property. They were trying to erase me. I'd seen people get buried in red tape and lies before. I'd watched defendants with airtight alibis go down because of one forged document or one bought witness, but they'd forgotten who they were playing with. I didn't scare, I documented, and this time, I had receipts. The court hearing for the emergency injunction finally arrived. It was held in the low brick building that served as the county's civil court annex. Nothing fancy, just beige walls, buzzing fluorescent lights, and a judge who'd seen one too many HOA disputes over mailbox widths and grass height. But this one was different. The courtroom was half full by the time Anita and I walked in. Neighbors, local reporters, and a couple of HOA members trying not to be noticed. Karen Ambrose wasn't among them. Our side came armed. Anita submitted the forged zoning map, the time-stamped database logs from Ellie Whitmore, the fake audio file analysis, the footage of the arson attempt, and a stack of signed affidavits, including Carl's, Ellie's, and Mrs. Hathaway's. Everything was clean, sequenced, and devastating. The HOA's new attorney, a stiff, half-panicked man named Patterson, looked like he was aging by the minute. He tried to argue that the zoning map was based on historical plans and that any criminal missteps were due to contractor miscommunication. The judge cut him off after 10 minutes. Are you suggesting that the fraudulent map in my hand is the result of an upload error? Because if so, Mr. Patterson, I'd recommend you stop talking and get your client a criminal defense attorney. Anita leaned over and whispered, "We just won the hearing." The judge granted the emergency injunction. Effective immediately, the HOA was barred from contacting me directly or indirectly, from representing my property in any official capacity, and from executing any development projects involving adjacent lots until a full investigation was completed. But that wasn't the real bombshell, because as we left the courtroom, a black SUV pulled up and two plainclothes investigators stepped out. One of them walked past us without a word and straight to Patterson. The other followed a clipboard into the courthouse with a warrant. 15 minutes later, word came down, a search had been authorized for the HOA office and clubhouse. Karen still hadn't shown up. That afternoon, Channel 9 ran a segment with leaked details. Financial records from Silver Fern Shores showed a charitable donation from Marlowe Holdings to a local environmental nonprofit, which just so happened to list Karen Ambrose as its only registered officer. It wasn't subtle. The donation had been deposited 3 weeks before the HOA began its campaign to force me off the property. There were emails, too. Badly redacted messages between Karen and a Marlowe exec discussing Phase 3, acquisition obstacles, and soft enforcement strategies. I couldn't believe the arrogance. Meanwhile, Ellie Whitmore submitted her resignation from the county planning department and released a public statement confirming everything: the backdated file, the unauthorized zoning map, and the pressure she'd received from an HOA board member. To make the overlay disappear, the news spread like wildfire. HOA members began resigning. 3 families put their houses on the market the same day. Carl told me someone in the HOA Facebook group had suggested dissolving the entire board before they drag us all into a class action suit. And then it happened. Karen Ambrose was arrested. It was quiet, almost anticlimactic. She was picked up outside a Pilates studio in a strip mall, still in her yoga gear. The charges were serious: conspiracy, attempted arson, forgery of municipal documents, and financial fraud. The mugshot hit the news within the hour. The same face that used to give passive-aggressive lectures about community standards now looked stunned and pale under harsh booking lights. Anita called me as soon as it aired. That's the first domino. Now it gets real. And she was right, because now the state attorney general's office was involved. What started as a personal land dispute had become a full-fledged criminal conspiracy investigation. I stood on my porch that night, looking out at the lake, watching the last sliver of sunset vanish behind the trees. The war wasn't over yet, but I'd just won the biggest battle of my life. The weeks that followed felt like watching a dam burst in slow motion. One crack, then another, then the entire thing gave way. Karen's arrest was just the start. Her so-called legal advisor, the smug man who'd tried to intimidate me at my gate weeks earlier, was picked up 3 days later on charges of fraud and obstruction. When his emails were subpoenaed, investigators found internal messages between HOA board members discussing how to create legal justification for property seizures. It was, as one assistant DA put it, RICO on training wheels, and that was before Marlowe Holdings' CEO got dragged into it. Turns out the so-called letter of intent between the HOA and Marlowe had been deliberately concealed from regulators. They were betting on a quiet land grab, followed by a multi-million-dollar waterfront redevelopment. But with the public spotlight burning white-hot, state investigators began digging into Marlowe's finances, offshore accounts, dummy nonprofits, shady consulting fees. Within a month, the project was dead. Marlowe Holdings pulled out and issued a bland public statement about reassessing strategic investments. Translation: we got caught. The state issued formal sanctions against Silver Fern Shores HOA, citing zoning manipulation, intimidation, and fraud. The board was dissolved by court order. Every active member was banned from holding HOA office in Tennessee for 10 years. The community website vanished. Their meeting house seized as evidence. But it didn't end there. The residents, fed up and humiliated, filed a class action lawsuit against the former board members for misappropriation of funds, property value sabotage, and exposing the neighborhood to criminal liability. Last I heard, most of the ex-members had either sold their homes or were hiding behind lawyers with trembling voices. As for me, justice came in several waves. First came the court victory, a final ruling that my property was legally distinct, purchased without HOA involvement, and subject to no community authority whatsoever. The judge called the HOA's actions a disturbing abuse of quasi-governmental power and awarded me $1.4 million in damages for harassment, legal fees, and loss of peaceful enjoyment of property. Second came the personal part. Karen's house, once the smug symbol of her control, was auctioned off to cover legal judgments. I bought it, cash. Then, with the help of a few contractors and a bottle of bourbon, I had her white picket fence torn down plank by plank and replaced with a split-rail border that matched my own. I hung a wooden sign at the edge of my yard, burned into the grain with iron letters. No HOA beyond this point. Private land, legally defended. Tourists stopped to take photos. Neighbors brought me beers. And I finally slept through the night without waking up to silence and wondering what they'd try next. But more than anything, I had my life back. The lake. The quiet. The porch swing that creaked just enough to remind me time was still passing. People ask if I regret buying this house. Hell no. It reminded me that sometimes the fight is the price of freedom. And if you're lucky, you get to win it on your own land, with the deed in your name, the truth on your side, and the bastards who tried to take it all scrambling for cover.